The air in Sodom had always been thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and roasting goat, of sweat and wine and ambition. But tonight, it was different. Tonight, the air was thin and sharp, holding a stillness that felt like a held breath. Adira tasted it on her tongue, the metallic tang of fear. It clung to the back of her throat, a premonition of ash. Her husband, Lot, was a pale statue by the door, his face illuminated by the flickering oil lamp. His knuckles were white where he gripped the wooden frame. Outside, the two strangers, the messengers, had called them, stood waiting. They were beautiful in a way that hurt the eyes, their features carved from moonlight and conviction, and their presence had leached all the familiar warmth from the pre-dawn cool. "You must not linger," the taller one said, his voice not a sound but a pressure in the air. "The cry against this place has reached the heavens. The Lord has sent us to destroy it." Adira's hands fluttered to the collar of her tunic. Her daughters, Paltith and Tama, huddled behind her, their eyes wide and dark in their young faces. They clutched each other's hands, their braids, usually so neat, coming undone in their terror. This was not the righteous anger of their father they were used to. The lectures about the city's wickedness that had become the background music of their lives. This was something else. This was an ending. The grip on her arm was sudden and cool, not human. It was the other messenger, his fingers strong but without the heat of blood. "Come," he urged, his gaze fixed not on her but on something far beyond the city walls, on the horizon that was just beginning to blush with a sick, bruised purple. "Take your husband, your two daughters who are here, and flee for your lives. Do not look behind you, nor stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, lest you be consumed." Consumed. The word was a stone in her belly. Consumed by what she looked past the serene, terrifying face of the messenger at the home she had made. The loom in the corner held a half-finished tapestry, its threads depicting the hills of Mamre where she had met Lot. Clay jars, filled with yesterday's water, stood cool and dark against the wall. The faint, sweet smell of figs still lingered from their evening meal. This was not a den of iniquity. This was her life, woven into the very mud of the walls. "Our other daughters," she whispered, the words catching. Their husband's Lot flinched, turning away from the door. "There is no time. I went to them. They thought I was jesting." His voice was hollow, a dead thing. The messenger's grip tightened, pulling her forward. Her sandals scraped on the threshold. Each step out of her home was a physical tearing. She felt it in her sinews, a severing of roots that had grown deep into this cursed, beloved soil for 20 years. The street was empty. The usual clamor of early risers to the baker stoking his oven, the bleating of sheep being led to market was gone. There was only silence, a profound and waiting void that seemed to pull all sound into itself. Even their footsteps were muffled by the dust. The air grew colder as they were led through the sleeping city. A dog whimpered from behind a closed door and was instantly shushed. The silence was not peaceful, it was terrified. It was the silence of 1,000 people hiding from a predator they could not see but could feel in their bones. A low hum had started, a vibration that seemed to rise from the very stones beneath their feet, a deep, resonant thrumming that was the world's last groan. The smell of sulfur, once a faint trace on the wind from the tar pits in the valley, was now a sharp, undeniable sting in her nostrils. It smelled of judgment. The city gate stood open, unmanned. The guards, who usually gambled and drank the night away, were gone. As they passed under the great stone archway, Adira felt a final, desperate pull. A voice inside her, the voice of her life, screamed for her to stop, to turn, to go back. It was the voice of the bread oven, still warm. The voice of her neighbor's newborn, crying in the night. The voice of her other two daughters, sleeping in their husbands' beds, who would wake to fire. The messenger's command echoed in her head. Do not look behind you, but it was the command of a stranger, a god she feared but did not know. The home she was leaving behind, she knew. She loved it. They were on the plain now, the dust of the road puffing up around their ankles. The ground was flat and barren, stretching towards the dark silhouette of the mountains that promised safety. But safety felt like a lie. The world behind her was the only truth Adira had ever known. As she walked, her mind refused the path ahead, turning inward, backward, to the life being stolen from her with every step. She remembered arriving in Sodom as a young bride, clinging to Lot's arm, her eyes wide with a country girl's awe. The city had seemed a marvel, a jewel of sun-baked brick shimmering in the valley. Its walls were high, its markets a kaleidoscope of color and sound. Merchants from Egypt and the East bartered in a dozen languages. The scent of cinnamon and myrrh mixed with the earthy smell of the river. It was a place of abundance, of life lived at its fullest, sharp and sweet and loud. Her home had been empty then, just four walls and a roof, but she had filled it. She had filled it with the rhythm of her loom, the clatter of pottery, the scent of crushed herbs. She remembered planting the fig tree in the small courtyard, its leaves providing a patch of cool shade where her girls would play, their laughter the most beautiful sound in the world. She saw their small, dusty feet running across the tiles, their faces smudged with honey, Paltith, serious and watchful, Tama, wild and free. This city was not an abstraction of sin to her, it was the vessel that held every precious memory she owned. Of course, she had seen the darkness Lot spoke of. She was not blind. She had seen the casual cruelty in the market, the arrogance of the wealthy, the way men's eyes would linger with a hunger that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with power. She had heard the whispers from the other women at the well, stories of brutality and perversion that made her hurry her daughters home. She felt the spiritual sickness of the place, a subtle poison in the rich wine, a decay beneath the beautiful surface. Lot, a righteous man in a city that mocked righteousness, felt it more keenly. He was an island in a sea of corruption, and he had grown weary of the waves. But her friends were here. Sarah, the potter's wife, who had taught her how to shape the clay, whose hands were always caked in the earth of the valley. Leah, the widow who lived next door, who shared her bread when Lot's business was slow. Were they wicked? Was Sarah's kindness a sin? Was Leah's quiet grief an abomination? The messenger's decree was absolute, a clean, sharp line drawn between the saved and the damned. But Adira's heart saw only shades of gray. Her life was a tapestry woven of both light and shadow, and she could not so easily pull the dark threads without unraveling the whole. The memory of the previous night rose in her, sharp and terrifying. The two messengers sitting at their table, refusing to eat, the way the light seemed to bend around them. Then the shouting from the street, the pounding on their door. The men of the city, young and old, their faces distorted with a leering, violent lust, demanding Lot bring out his guests. That we may know them, they had snarled, and the meaning had been brutally clear. She remembered Lot's panic, his desperate, shameful offer of their virgin daughters to appease the mob. Adira had pulled Palteth and Tama behind her, shielding them with her body, her heart a cold stone of fury and terror. The memory was a brand, a confirmation of the city's sickness. The messengers had struck the crowd blind, a miracle of quiet, chilling power. Yes, the city was rotten, she knew it, but her married daughters were still in it, her friends, the fig tree in her courtyard, the ghosts of her children's laughter. How could a God of righteousness ask her to simply walk away and forget? How could a life be unwritten in a single night? The hum grew louder. It was no longer just a vibration in the soles of her feet, but a palpable pressure against her skin, a deep, resonant note that seemed to emanate from the core of the earth itself. The sky was no longer blushing, it was hemorrhaging light. A sickly, orange-yellow glow pulsed behind the walls of Sodom, backlighting the city in a way that made it look like a jagged wound on the horizon. The air, already sharp with sulfur, now carried a new scent, the smell of ozone, of air, superheating, of the very elements preparing to unmake themselves. Paltith stumbled, crying out as she tripped on a loose stone. Lot, his face a mask of grim determination, pulled her up without looking back. Keep moving, he gritted out, his voice raw. To the mountains. Zoar. We must reach Zoar. But Zoar was just a name. The mountains were a distant, meaningless shape. The only reality was the growing pressure at her back. Adira felt it like a physical push, a wave of heat and energy building behind them. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee this unseen, impending doom. And yet another, deeper instinct fought back. It was the instinct of a mother, of a wife, of a creator of a home. It was the part of her that refused to believe that 20 years of life could be erased as if they had never been. Do not look behind you. The command was no longer a warning, it was a torment. Why? What was so terrible that it could not be witnessed? What was this God that demanded not only her future but her past as well? To walk forward without a backward glance was to agree that her life had been meaningless, a mistake to be discarded. It was to concede that the love she felt for her home, for her neighbors, for the very light that fell on her courtyard was a sin worthy of annihilation. Her steps grew heavier, slower, her feet felt like lead. It was a conscious act of rebellion. Lot and the girls were pulling ahead, their forms growing smaller in the unnatural twilight. Adira, come, Lot's voice, was a frantic plea carried on the charged air. She could feel the change in the atmosphere, the final, pregnant pause before the crescendo. The hum intensified to a deafening thrum. The light behind her was brightening, as if a new, terrible sun were about to be born from the heart of the city. Her skin tingled. The fine hairs on her arms stood on end. She knew, with a certainty that transcended thought, that she was standing at the edge of the end of her world, and she had to see it. It wasn't just disobedience, it was a need, a sacred human imperative to bear witness. To not see it would be the greater betrayal. It would be to let her world die in darkness, unseen, unmourned. Her gaze was fixed on Lot's retreating back, on the small hunched shoulders of her daughters. They were moving toward the future, but her heart, her soul, everything that made her Adira was still back there. In the house with the half-finished tapestry, in the beds where her other children slept, in the soil that held the roots of her fig tree. A single tear slid down her cheek, hot against her cold skin. It was a tear for all of it, for the beauty and the wickedness, for the laughter and the cruelty, for the life she had lived and the death it was about to die. She stopped walking. The ground beneath her feet was vibrating violently now. Lot and her daughters were screaming her name, their voices thin and distant against the rising roar. But she did not hear them. She heard only the siren call of her memory, the desperate, loving pull of home. Slowly, deliberately, fighting the instinct for self-preservation, fighting the command of gods and angels, she began to turn. The first sound was not a roar, but a tear. It was the sound of the sky ripping open from horizon to horizon, a dry, cosmic crackle that vibrated in Adira's teeth and bones. For a single, silent heartbeat, all was white. A light so absolute, so pure and terrible, bleached the world of color and form, casting their foreshadows long and stark before them on the dusty plain, 3 figures fleeing, 1 figure turning. Then came the heat. It was not the gentle warmth of the sun, but a concussive physical blow, a solid wall of force that slammed into her back, stealing the air from her lungs. And with the heat came the fire. It did not fall from the sky so much as the sky itself became fire. Streams of liquid gold and incandescent sulfur poured down in a silent, horrifying torrent. It was not the chaotic rage of a natural fire. It had a purpose, a terrifying deliberateness. It descended like a curtain of judgment, each drop finding its mark. She saw the great walls of Sodom, which had stood for generations, not crumble but melt. The stone glowed cherry red, then white, then simply dissolved into rivers of slag that ran down the streets she had walked 1,000 times. The ziggurat at the city's heart, a proud finger pointing to the heavens, erupted from within, a blossom of white-hot fire that consumed it in an instant. The silence broke. A single, unified scream rose from the city, the sound of 10,000 souls realizing the nature of their end. It was a sound of shock and agony, but it was brutally short. The fire was too fast, too total. The scream was cut off as if by a knife, swallowed by the cataclysmic roar of the inferno. The roar was the sound of a world being unmade, of stone vaporizing, of water flashing to steam, of life being rendered into its most basic elements. Adira's turn was slow, an act of agonizing reverence. Her neck muscles screamed in protest. Her body, trained for survival, wanted to cower, to run, to shield itself. But her soul, her heart, demanded this last communion. Her eyes found the district where her house stood. She could not see the building itself, only the column of impossible fire that now occupied that space. She imagined her loom, the threads of the mamre tapestry turning to black ash in a fraction of a second. She imagined her clay pots cracking, the water within them exploding into steam. The fig tree, its leaves curling into black lace before vanishing entirely. The air she was breathing was no longer air. It was a searing cocktail of sulfur and ash and things that had once been human. As her eyes, wide and unblinking, took in the hellscape of her home, the transformation began. It started in her feet. A sudden, shocking coldness, an absolute zero that defied the incandescent heat washing over her. It was the cold of absolute stasis. A crystalline hardness spread up from her sandals, locking her ankles, her shins. She tried to cry out, but the cold was already seizing her throat. Her body, which had been a vessel of warmth and life, was becoming a conduit for something alien, something mineral. The taste of salt flooded her mouth, sharp and overwhelming, as if she had swallowed the sea. Her skin, which a moment before had felt scorched, now prickled with a million tiny points of cold as crystals bloomed across its surface. It was a dreadful, beautiful process. The firestorm of Sodom, reflected in her widening pupils, fractured into 1,000 glittering facets as her eyes themselves began to crystallize. The last image she perceived was the city, her world, her life, burning in a kaleidoscopic blaze. The roar of the apocalypse faded, muffled as her ears filled with solidifying salt. It was replaced by a new sound, an intimate one, the faint, internal crackle of her own substance changing, the whisper of her blood turning to brine, her bones to halite. A single tear, the one she had shed for her lost life, escaped her crystallizing eye. It did not fall. It froze on her cheek, a perfect saline jewel. Her last thought was not of fear, or of the God who had condemned her. It was of the scent of baking bread. Then, there was no thought at all, only stillness, only salt. Lot did not dare look back. The angel's command was branded onto his soul, a line of fire he would not cross, but he felt her absence. There was a sudden void beside him, a missing warmth, a cessation of the soft scuff of her sandals on the path. He had been holding her hand, his grip tight and desperate, and then there was nothing. The empty air where her hand had been was a colder, more terrifying reality than the inferno at his back. "Adira!" he screamed, his voice tearing, lost in the deafening roar. He stopped, his body a war between the terror pushing him forward and the love pulling him back. His daughters, Paltith and Tamah, stumbled to a halt beside him, their faces streaked with tears and soot. The heat was a physical presence pressing on them, trying to peel the skin from their bones. The light of the burning plane painted them in demonic shades of orange and red. Mother Tamah cried, her small voice a bird's chirp in a hurricane. She turned, her eyes searching the path behind them before Lot could stop her. Her gasp was not loud. It was a small, sharp intake of breath, a sound of utter, soul-shattering disbelief. Lot followed her gaze, his heart constricting with a dread that was somehow worse than the fire. And he saw her. Just a few paces back on the path stood a pillar. It was roughly the shape of a woman, its form coarse and human, as if sculpted by a clumsy, grieving hand. It was not the pristine white of pure salt, but a gray, gritty column laced with the dust of the road and glistening horribly in the light of the burning cities. It was Adira, frozen forever in her final act of love and defiance. Her head was turned back toward Sodom, her posture one of longing, of a final, eternal gaze fixed upon the home she could not abandon. The wind, hot and acrid, whistled around the pillar, creating a low, mournful moan. A single crystalline tear was etched onto its cheek, catching the hellish light like a star. Lot fell to his knees. A sound tore from his throat that was not human. It was the howl of a creature whose world had been ripped in half, a cry of pure, undiluted agony. He had obeyed. He had done what the messengers of God had commanded. He had fled, he had not looked back, and his reward was this monument to his loss. Paltith and Tamah collapsed beside him, their wails joining his. They reached out for the pillar, their hands stopping just short of touching its cold, gritty surface, as if they feared it would crumble to dust, or that its chilling stasis would infect them too. The angels stood nearby, their faces impassive, their beautiful features unreadable in the flickering light. Their silence was the most profound condemnation of all. Judgment was not a negotiation, it was an unalterable fact. The fire roared behind them, the pillar stood before them, and the vast, empty plain stretched ahead. There was no comfort here. There was only the command to keep moving, to walk away from their life, their home, and now, their mother, who would stand guard over the ashes forever. The journey to Zoar was a silent funeral march. The world had been scoured, sterilized by divine fire. A fine gray ash fell like a soft, persistent snow, coating their hair and shoulders, a final remnant of the world they had known. The ground beneath their feet was littered with it. The air was thick and tasted of ruin. The sun, when it finally rose, was not a source of light and warmth, but a blood-red, wounded eye staring through a shroud of smoke. Lot was no longer a patriarch leading his family to safety. He was a hollowed-out man, an automaton driven by a single terrible imperative: survive. But he did not know why. The fear that had propelled him from Sodom was gone, replaced by a vast aching emptiness. He had traded his wife for his life, and he was beginning to understand it was a fool's bargain. He had listened to the voice of God, and in his obedience, he had lost the heart of his world. Each step forward was a step deeper into a life he did not want, a future bleached of all joy. The memory of Adira's hand slipping from his was a phantom limb, an ache that would never leave him. His daughters walked behind him, their youth burned away in a single night. They did not speak, did not cry. Their eyes were vacant, fixed on the ashen ground. They had witnessed the end of their world, the death of their friends and sisters, and the horrifying transformation of their own mother. The image was seared into their minds, that rough-hewn pillar of salt, forever looking back. It was not just their mother, It was a symbol of the terrible, unforgiving power that governed their lives. A power that could erase a city and turn a woman to stone for a single, backward glance. What future could they build in the shadow of such a god? Their grief was curdling into a deep, silent terror, a fear of the divine that was far more profound than any fear they had felt of the men of Sodom. The landscape itself was a testament to the new reality. The once fertile plain was now a wasteland. The river that had nourished the valley was choked with ash, its waters black and steaming. The familiar sights and sounds of their world were gone, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. The pillar of salt was now a landmark in a dead land, a permanent fixture in their geography of sorrow. It marked the boundary between what was and what could never be again. Lot knew that for the rest of his days, in every quiet moment, he would see it standing there, glistening in the memory of the fire, a monument to a love that was stronger than fear and a judgment that was colder than death. Was it a sin, or was it an act of profound and tragic love? The angels called it disobedience. The law, written in fire and stone, called it a transgression worthy of oblivion. But the human heart, which measures life in moments of connection, the warmth of a hearth, the laughter of a child, the shade of a familiar tree, knows a different truth. To walk away without looking back is to sever the soul from its own history. It is an act of spiritual amputation. Adira was asked to unbecome